Most people think payday is a reward. But if you look at it differently, payday is actually a control point of your entire financial life. Because in the first few hours after you get paid, you're not just spending money, you're assigning direction to it. And over time, those directions either build something or slowly cancel each other out. That's why two people earning the same income can end up in completely different places, just based on what they do right after getting paid. Now, the reason most people don't notice this is because everything feels normal. Money comes in, and naturally, things need to be paid. Bills, subscriptions, food, small purchases, it all feels justified. But when you zoom out, what's actually happening is something very simple. Your money is flowing out faster than it's being directed. So the first step is not saving. It's awareness. You need to pause long enough to see what's about to happen. Because if money moves automatically, it follows habits, not goals. And habits, if they're not designed, usually lead to the same result every month. Once you create that pause, the next step is to assign roles to your money. This is where people think it's complicated. But it's actually very simple. Every dollar you earn should belong somewhere before it gets spent. Because money without a role becomes flexible, and flexible money disappears. Now, here's where this becomes powerful. When you assign roles, you're not restricting yourself. You're creating boundaries. And boundaries are what make financial systems stable. Without them, everything blends together. And you lose track of what's actually happening. At this point, people usually ask, what percentages should I use? But that's not the most important part. The real goal is consistency. Even a simple model like 70, 20, 10 works because it creates repeatable behavior. Now, once your structure is clear, you move your money immediately. And this step is critical because time is what turns intention into spending. The longer money sits unassigned, the higher the chance it gets used differently than planned. This is where automation becomes one of the most powerful tools because it removes the need to decide every single time. And once decisions are automated, behavior becomes consistent by default. Now, here's something people underestimate. Automation doesn't just save time, it reduces mistakes. Because manual systems rely on motivation. Automated systems rely on structure, and structure is always more reliable. After that, the next step is tracking, not to control every detail, but to understand patterns. Because once you see patterns, you can adjust them. And that's where improvement starts. Now, once you start tracking consistently, something interesting happens. You begin to notice patterns that weren't obvious before. Not just where your money goes, but how often it goes there and why. And this is where awareness turns into control. Because once you can clearly see your habits, you can start adjusting them without guessing. And when you adjust those patterns, even slightly, the impact compounds. Not in one day, not in 1 week, but over time, because small changes in behavior, repeated every payday, start stacking on top of each other. And that's how real progress happens. Quietly, but consistently. This is also where people start realizing something important. It's not about cutting everything out. It's about aligning spending with what actually matters. Because if your money is going toward things you value, the system becomes sustainable. And sustainability is what makes it last. Now, over time, your payday routine becomes predictable. Not boring, but stable. You know exactly what happens when money comes in, where it goes, how it moves, what it builds. And that removes uncertainty, which is one of the biggest sources of financial stress. And once that stability is in place, something else changes. You stop reacting emotionally to money. You're not stressed by every expense. You're not overly excited by every paycheck. Because now you understand the system behind it. At this stage, money becomes less about short-term decisions and more about long-term direction. You're not thinking in weeks anymore. You're thinking in months, even years. And that shift in time perspective changes everything. And this is where most people realize something they didn't expect. Earning more money doesn't automatically fix anything. Because without a system, higher income just increases the size of the same problem. More and more out, no real change. But when you already have a system in place, more income actually works in your favor. Because now every increase gets distributed correctly, automatically. Saving grows faster. investing grows faster. Progress accelerates. So instead of waiting for the perfect moment or a higher paycheck, you build the habit now at your current level, because this routine doesn't depend on how much you earn. It depends on how consistently you apply it. Because at the end of the day, payday isn't just when you get paid. It's when you decide what your money is going to do for you. And if you follow a simple routine every single time, you don't just manage money. You build a system that moves you forward automatically. Now, once your system is running consistently, something subtle starts to happen. You begin to trust your own process. You're not constantly questioning your decisions anymore because you've seen the results repeat over time. And that trust is important because without it, people tend to jump between different strategies too quickly. And this is where people usually make a mistake. They start looking for something better, even when what they're doing is already working, because progress feels slow. But slow doesn't mean wrong. In fact, most financial systems are supposed to feel slow in the beginning, because real growth comes from repetition, not from one big move. And your payday routine is exactly that, repetition. Same actions, same structure, applied over and over again. Now, another thing that starts to change is how you see spending. It stops being random. You begin to notice which expenses actually matter and which ones just happen out of habit. And that awareness naturally reduces waste without forcing it. And this is important because the goal isn't to cut everything. It's to optimize. You keep what adds value to your life and slowly remove what doesn't. Over time, this leads to something powerful. More of your income starts staying with you, not because you earn more, but because you lose less. And when more money stays in your system, it has more time to grow, which is something most people overlook. Growth needs time, not just money. This is also where compounding starts becoming visible. At first, it's almost invisible, but as your system continues, the effects begin to show more clearly. And that's when motivation usually increases. Now, here's something important. Most people try to feel motivated before they take action. But in reality, motivation comes after you see progress. And progress comes from consistent action. And your payday routine creates that cycle because it guarantees action every time you get paid, which means progress becomes predictable. Another shift that happens is how you view income itself. It stops being something you just spend and starts becoming something you deploy, like a resource with a purpose. And when you think this way, every paycheck becomes an opportunity to improve your system, not just your lifestyle. Now, over time, your system becomes more efficient. You start adjusting percentages, improving allocation, making smarter decisions. And this is where learning starts to compound too, because you're not just managing money anymore. You're understanding it. At this stage, mistakes still happen, but they don't break your system because structure absorbs small errors. And that's a huge difference compared to having no system, where even small mistakes can cause big problems. Now, this is where confidence builds, not from guessing, but from seeing consistent results over time. And confidence leads to better decisions, because you're no longer acting out of fear or uncertainty. At this point, your financial life starts feeling simpler, not because it's easy, but because it's structured. And simplicity is powerful, because it makes consistency easier. Now, one of the biggest long-term benefits of this routine is clarity. You always know where you stand, and clarity removes stress, because uncertainty is what usually creates financial anxiety. So instead of reacting to problems, you start preventing them. And over time, all of this adds up, not in a dramatic way, but in a steady, reliable way. And that's really the point of a payday routine. It turns something simple, getting paid, into a system for progress. So instead of wondering where your money went, you start seeing exactly where it's taking you. At a certain point, if you keep following this routine consistently, something deeper begins to change. And it's not just your bank balance, it's your relationship with money. In the beginning, money usually feels emotional. You feel good when you get paid, a bit stressed when you spend, and sometimes uncertain when you check your balance. There's a constant cycle of reaction. But once you build a payday system and repeat it enough times, that emotional cycle starts to flatten. Not because money stops mattering, but because it becomes more predictable. And predictability changes everything. When you know exactly what's going to happen every time you get paid, where the money goes, how much gets saved, how much gets invested, you stop relying on willpower. You stop needing motivation because the system handles it for you. And this is where most people never reach. They stay in the emotional cycle. They rely on discipline, motivation, temporary bursts of control. But those things don't last. Systems do. And once you cross that line from emotional money management to structured money management, you don't just improve your finances. You simplify your life. Now this leads into something even more important, decision quality. Because most financial problems are not really income problems. They're decision problems. And decisions are heavily influenced by timing. If you decide what to do with your money in the moment, under pressure, or based on emotion, your decisions are usually inconsistent. But if you decide ahead of time, inside a system, your decisions become structured. Think about it like this. If every time you get paid, you already know how much is being saved, how much is being invested, how much is safe to spend, then you remove the hardest part of money management, uncertainty. You're no longer asking yourself questions every day. You're not negotiating with yourself. You've already decided. And that creates something powerful. Consistency without effort. And consistency is what builds results. Not intensity. Not short bursts. Not perfect months. Just consistent, repeated actions over time. Now, once your decisions become structured, something interesting happens to your financial progress. It becomes smoother. Not faster overnight, but smoother in a way that's much more sustainable. Because without a system, progress usually looks like this. You save for a while, then stop. You invest for a bit, then pull back. You try to improve, then lose momentum. It's inconsistent, but with a payday routine, that inconsistency starts to disappear. Your system keeps moving, even when you don't feel like it. And that's important, because your financial life shouldn't depend on how motivated you feel that day. It should depend on what you've already set up. And when progress becomes smooth instead of unpredictable, you stop second-guessing yourself. You trust the process more, and that trust keeps you moving forward. At this stage, you also start to notice something else. Your system begins to handle complexity for you. Life doesn't stay simple. Expenses change. Income changes. Unexpected things happen. And without a system, those changes can completely throw you off. But when you already have structure in place, those changes become easier to handle. Because you're not starting from zero every time something changes. You're adjusting something that already exists. And that's a huge difference. It's the difference between reacting and adapting. Reacting feels chaotic. Adapting feels controlled. And over time, that ability to adapt without losing progress is what creates real financial stability. So when you step back and look at everything, this isn't really about a payday routine. It's about building a system that removes randomness from your financial life. Because randomness is what keeps people stuck. Random spending, random saving, random decisions. Nothing connects. Nothing builds. But once you introduce structure, even a simple one, everything starts connecting. Your income connects to your goals. Your spending connects to your priorities. Your saving connects to your future. And over time, those connections turn into progress. Not fast, not dramatic, but real. And that's the part most people miss. They're looking for something big to change their finances. But most of the time, it's something small, repeated consistently, that changes everything. And payday, that simple moment when money comes in, that's your opportunity to make that change happen. Every single time. At this point, if you followed everything we've talked about, you might realize something important. None of this is actually complicated. There's no secret formula here. No hidden trick. No perfect strategy that suddenly changes everything overnight. It's just a system. A simple, repeatable structure that turns something ordinary, getting paid, into something meaningful. And that's what most people miss. They're not struggling because money is too complex. They're struggling because their system doesn't exist. Or it exists in a way that isn't consistent. Because without consistency, even the best ideas don't work. You can know exactly what to do with money. You can understand saving, investing, budgeting, all of it. But if it's not applied the same way, over and over again, it never turns into results. And that's why this routine matters more than it seems. It's not about controlling every dollar. It's about creating a pattern that repeats itself. Because patterns are what create outcomes. If your pattern is random, your results will be random. If your pattern is structured, your results will eventually reflect that structure. And the most powerful part of this is that it doesn't depend on where you start. It doesn't matter if your income is small. It doesn't matter if you're just beginning. The system works the same way at every level. The only difference is scale. And that's something people often overlook. They think they need more money before they can take control of it. But in reality, control comes first. And once you have that control, more money just amplifies what you're already doing. So if your system is weak, more money won't fix it. It will just make the same problems bigger. But if your system is strong, more money makes everything easier. Growth becomes faster. Progress becomes more visible. And your financial life becomes more stable. And that's really what this entire routine is building. Not just savings, not just investments, but stability. Because stability is what allows everything else to grow. Without stability, every step forward feels temporary. You move ahead, then fall back. You improve, then reset. And that cycle can go on for years. But once you break that cycle, once you introduce structure into your payday routine, everything starts to connect. Your income connects to your actions. Your actions connect to your results. And your results begin to reflect your effort in a way that actually makes sense. And when that happens, you stop feeling stuck. Not because everything is perfect, but because everything is moving, even slowly, even quietly. There's direction. And direction is what most people are missing. They're moving, but not necessarily forward. They're earning, but not necessarily building. They're spending, but not necessarily progressing. And that's the difference this routine creates. It aligns everything. It gives your money a path. And once your money has a path, it starts taking you somewhere. Not instantly, not dramatically, but consistently. And consistency is what makes it real. Because real financial progress doesn't feel like a sudden breakthrough. It feels like a gradual shift, a point where things stop being confusing, a point where decisions become easier, a point where you're no longer guessing. And that point doesn't come from one big change. It comes from small, repeated actions, done the same way, every time you get paid. And eventually, those actions stop feeling like effort. They become automatic. They become part of how you operate. And when that happens, you're no longer trying to manage money. You're running a system. And systems, when they're built properly, don't rely on motivation. They don't rely on discipline. They just keep working. In the background, quietly, consistently. And that's when everything really starts to change. Not when you earn more. Not when you learn more. But when you start applying what you already know in a way that repeats itself. Every single time. So the next time you get paid, don't just see it as income. See it as a moment of control, a moment where you decide what happens next, because that moment, repeated over and over again, is what builds everything.